Tracing a violent history that lasted for 3 billion years, the investigation into how Loch Ness was made now moves forward to the recent past, only 10,000 years ago. The final link in the chain of evidence is to discover how the wide, deep waters of Loch Ness were finally made, and whether a descendant of the dinosaurs could possibly have survived there to create the myth of the Loch Ness Monster. A vital clue was uncovered in the 19th century by one of the greatest scientific minds the world has ever known, Charles Darwin. In 1838, Darwin came to Scotland to investigate a mystery in the remote valley of Glen Roy, about 20 miles from Loch Ness. For hundreds of years, people had been baffled by 3 extraordinary parallel lines which run round both sides of the valley. Strange horizontal cuts in the hillside, in some places more than 30 feet wide. These parallel roads, as they are called, run exactly level for more than 20 miles. What could have made them? Dr. Pete Nino is following in Darwin's footsteps to the Glen Roy parallel roads and the story they reveal.
Their creation was a mystery for a very long time, and initially people just thought they were perhaps created by giants, a thing of myth or legend. And then in the 19th century, a number of scientists came here, including Charles Darwin. And when he saw them, he thought they were exactly the same as features he'd seen in South America, where earthquakes had uplifted old marine shorelines and left them abandoned higher up from the sea.
Darwin was so convinced the parallel roads were the remains of old seashores that he published a paper with his results, and the world of science believed him. But for once, Darwin was wrong. In 1840, 2 years after Darwin's visit, a Swiss scientist named Louis Agassi came to Glen Roy. Agassi had spent a lifetime studying glaciers and the effects of glaciation on the landscape of the Swiss Alps. When he examined the parallel roads, Agassi realized that they were ancient shorelines, but that the valley had been filled not by the sea, but by a freshwater lake. From his knowledge of glaciers in the Alps, Agassi was able to show that a freshwater lake had once filled the valley. The lake was kept full by a huge glacier which blocked the end of the valley. As the glacier melted and froze again 3 times, the water in the valley emptied and filled up to a different level, carving out the 3 relic beaches.
Initially, Agassi wasn't believed because people believed Darwin, and then over time it became clear that Agassi was correct, and Darwin claimed it was one of his great embarrassments that he'd got something so terribly wrong, which sort of shows that even great scientists can make mistakes.
The evidence at Glen Roy convinced Agassi that many features in the Scottish landscape must have been made by glaciers. And that led him to the startling conclusion at the time that the whole of Scotland had once been covered by ice.
And the moment you make that leap that what you've got here was created by glaciers, you've instantly got to make the leap to the fact that we must have had a very cold climate here in the past, cold enough for ice sheets and glaciers to build up. This site is of world importance in terms of the understanding of glaciations and the fact that in the past ice covered a much larger proportion of the planet than it currently covers.
This extraordinary investigation led eventually to the idea of the Ice Age, periods in the geological past when much of the northern hemisphere was covered in glaciers and ice sheets. Since Agassi's discoveries, scientists have been investigating the role of ice in making Loch Ness.
About 2.5 million years ago, the global climate started to cool, and since then we've had a series of repeated glaciations, roughly about once every 100,000 years.
Each time the ice advanced, temperatures plummeted. Average winter temperatures were at least 30 degrees colder than today. As the ice built up, it reached extraordinary thicknesses.
The ice sheet over the centre of Scotland would have been 3,000 or 4,000 feet thick. And here in Loch Ness, it would have certainly been a couple of thousand feet thick. You might have seen a few of the highest mountains just peeking out the top of the ice sheet, but in the main, the whole of the landscape would have just been blanketed by ice.
But what effect did this vast weight of ice have on the creation of Loch Ness? The loch itself is difficult to investigate because it's full of water. But there's another location where the evidence is clear. Just 20 miles from Loch Ness is the forbidding valley of Glen Roy. Glen Roy is a legendary place in Scottish history, as it was here that an infamous massacre took place in 1692, when the MacDonald clan were murdered in their beds by the Campbells. The shape of this valley sheds light on the way Loch Ness was made.
If you could actually drain the water out of Loch Ness, what you'd actually end up with is a valley with this sort of shape. And looking down Glen Roy, you can see it's a very, very steep-sided, flat-bottomed valley, and it's basically been created by glaciers repeatedly flowing down the valley, eroding it, and basically gouging out what was originally a V-shaped valley and turning it into an over-deepened U-shaped valley.
Glaciers are extremely efficient at eroding the landscape. They pick up vast amounts of rock debris, which is carried along at the base of the glacier. With the weight of millions of tons of ice on top of it, this rock debris grinds away the bedrock like sandpaper, scouring and deepening the valleys to a characteristic U-shape. Across Scotland, there are hundreds of valleys with this distinctive U-shape, bearing witness to the huge number of glaciers which once covered this whole region. At Loch Ness, underwater mapping has revealed that the loch has this signature U-shape. It's flat-bottomed with very steep sides. In some places, only 50 feet from the shoreline, the water is over 500 feet deep. Further proof that Loch Ness was made by a glacier. There was already a long river valley which had formed along the line of weakness created by the shattered rocks along the Great Glen Fault. Then, during the last ice age, a giant glacier flowed down the valley, slowly carving out Loch Ness.
As ice flows down it, it scours it out, deepens it, and over a series of glaciations, it deepens it to the extent that it's now, a loch 750 feet deep.
The investigation is now faced with two final questions. How did Loch Ness fill up with fresh water, and what keeps it full? Loose rock and boulders found on a huge ridge 250 feet high at the head of the loch could provide the answer.
The immediately obvious thing about these large rocks is that they're extremely smooth and well-rounded, and that indicates that they've been transported by water. They're also very large, this is very heavy, so you need a lot of energy, so that tells you that you've got a lot of meltwater that's carried it and then subsequently dumped it where we are now.
This evidence, combined with discoveries about climate change, shows what happened here. About 10,000 years ago, global temperatures rose rapidly, the ice began to melt, and the glaciers retreated.
Glaciers down there would have been eroding Loch Ness, bringing up large amounts of sediment, and that sediment is then being transported in this direction by the flowing ice and also by flowing meltwater.
As the ice melted, a huge river formed under the Loch Ness Glacier, carrying with it vast amounts of rock debris.
And then what we've got here, what we're standing on, is in effect the zone where the glacier is now dumping that sediment.
Millions of tons of rocks created an enormous plug which dammed the river and stopped the water from escaping. As the ice melted, the valley filled up, finally making the lake we know as Loch Ness. But what of the Loch Ness monster? The iconic image is now known to be a fake. But is there any way that the mythical beast could be a descendant of the dinosaurs?
We have two geological facts that tell us that Loch Ness cannot be inhabited by a dinosaur. One is the dinosaurs died a long time ago, and the loch itself, geologically, is very young. Dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. So 65 million years to 10,000 years It's a long time distance, and there is no chance at all that you would have preserved in this loch an ancient monster from times millions of years ago. The loch's too young.
So the geological evidence proves that Loch Ness could not be home to a dinosaur that somehow survived there since the Jurassic. The awesome geological history of Loch Ness has thrown up many mysteries. But for science, the Loch Ness Monster is not one of them.